Welcome to Intentional Divorce Insights. I'm Leah Hadley, certified divorce financial analyst, accredited financial counselor, and the founder of Intentional Divorce Solutions. I'll be your guide through the complexities of divorce, finance, and emotional wellness. Join me as we uncover practical tips and empowering insights to help you navigate your divorce with clarity and intention. Welcome back. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome Melissa Gragg today. She is a divorce mediator and business valuation expert with 20 years of experience, testifying in over 50 cases for business valuations and financial matters. She has served as a financial mediator since 2016, a neutral joint valuation expert for businesses and families in conflict. Welcome, Melissa.
Thanks, Leah. So glad to be on your new podcast.
So I'm really excited about the topic we're talking about today. We're talking all about intentional business valuation. And one of the things that you and I were talking about earlier, Melissa, was that businesses can be such a contentious issue in divorces, family businesses. So Melissa, talk to us a little bit about why that is.
Well, businesses are always going to be the issue in a divorce because they're creating income and they're creating an asset. And so they have value just to exist, but typically the value is based on some of that cash flow. And a lot of times we have these businesses that are providing all of the wealth for the family. And they could be run by one person, and that one person may not totally disclose all the information about the businesses. A lot of times we will champion when we're doing really great, and we won't talk about when we got to get on debt or we have to take out a loan or, when we take those risky things. So I think then when you start to get divorced, you hear everybody, you heard your spouse saying, oh, this is worth ton of money. This is worth millions, eventually. But they weren't as forthcoming with some of the other pieces, which could have been, I took out $1 million of debt in order to try to make this work. So I think it's really that a perception that these businesses are worth a lot of money and a perception that I'm going to get a large payout. And so that's really not always the case.
It's such an important point, and so often the business owner themselves doesn't really have any idea of what the business is worth. And so it can be a very eye-opening experience for everybody involved in the process. And a lot of times people don't even realize that they have to have a business valuation. So Melissa, tell me when somebody should reach out for a business valuation.
Well, the business valuation is a very interesting piece. So normally when you go to get divorced, each of you will hire somebody and then they'll kind of fight in court. Or there's a way to hire one person and get kind of an idea of what the value is for both of you at the same time. And that's what we encourage. But you'll also, if you step back a little bit about the psychology of a business owner, the business owner is usually a risk taker. They're usually doing some amazing things, which takes some amazing risks. And they're also usually very gregarious. And they also think that their business is worth a lot more than sometimes it is. So that conversation when you're married and happy is always like, oh, honey, we're going to have so much money and this is great and the future is bright and this business is worth $10 million. But even when it's not a divorce and I'm just coming in to look at it from estate planning or strategic planning, that conversation with the business owner is sometimes a hard one because it's not worth 10 million. So we come into this and say, well, they must be hiding things because if it's not worth 10 million, they've told me it's worth 10 million for years. And why isn't it? And the only thing that I can say is that a lot of times it never was. And so you're holding on to something that you heard in the past or somebody wrote down, and that never was the situation. So you feel like you lost something when it was never there in the first place. It's usually just a business owner really like being robust about the future. And if you're hiring somebody to come in, a lot of times we say, do you really need a report? Like, can we just come in and run some numbers? Because in the long run, most people just want some number, like, what's the bookend? What's my top value? What's my low value? And it usually does create a little bit of a range. Like if that person really thought their business was worth 10 million, I might come in and give a preliminary value that I just review with everybody online, right? So we don't have any paper yet, but we review it online, and maybe the value is really between 3.5 and 4 million, right? So I have a process where I have to talk them through how we got there. But in the long run, do you really need the full services just to start? Because in a divorce, usually that business is just one line on the statement, like one little number in the whole scheme of all of the numbers for your divorce, but it is the most unknown number. It is the most contested number. Because again, if I'm the business owner and I've been telling you it's worth 10 million forever, and then I get divorced, like, I don't want it to be worth 10 million. I want it to be worth zero.
Right.
And so now I've changed my story so completely. It does seem like that's crazy, but maybe I was just a little full of it the whole time. So I think that's the hardest piece, is to like think that there is something fishy going on. And so hiring somebody towards the beginning, like not knowing that number, you will start to negotiate a lot of other pieces of the puzzle and not know what's going to happen to that asset or the cash flow from it. And I think that those are the pieces that you're really trying to figure out.
It's such a good point, and I like how you really picked up on that loss that people feel, because they have this idea in their mind around what the value is, and suddenly it's dropped, and they feel like they've lost something, like they lost a ton of money just from that perception. And that can be really hard when you're going through this process and you're feeling stressed about money and you're worried about how you're going to pay your bills going forward. That can really be a scary place to be if suddenly now you're feeling like the marital estate is worth dramatically less than what you had thought it was.
Well, and I think that, again, normally you would each hire a valuation person. They would each do their numbers on the same business, right? Same financials typically. But they might come up with two different numbers. And even if we, as financial professionals and valuators, need to be unbiased, there's just this natural bias that's going to come when you have a client. You'll be like, well, what is the best value? What is the lowest value? And so when you're working with a professional that works with both of you, there really isn't let's try to make it higher for one party or lower for the other party. And it's this implicit bias, right? You have this person that's like, if we don't get a high value, I'm going to get nothing. It's not that you're intentionally doing it. It's that divorce is so emotional that you could get caught up and you don't see some of the implicit bias, right? Now, I've been doing this for 20 years, so I kind of have, created my boundaries so that I'm not biased. But the best way, I think, for a couple to really get out of that is to work together and to work together. And you could probably talk to any evaluator around the country and say, would you work with both of us? And they could either say yes or no. Now, it's not an easy process, right? You still have to deal with kind of, I am usually defending my value to both people, right? And they're both kind of mildly upset with me because it's like, well, that's too low and that's too high. But it's almost like I've said in the past, if both of you are mildly unhappy, I probably got it exactly right.
Right.
And that's the hard truth. And so, but I think in the conversation when working with both of them, if the value doesn't come at 10 million, and that spouse is like, why is it not 10 million? The conversation of why it's not at 10 million is a great conversation to have in front of both people, because it's not your spouse saying it's not 10 million. It's me saying it's not 10 million.
Right.
And usually I have to just say, well, you only had revenue of $1 million and it's not worth 10 million, sometimes it's very clear, but if it's not clear, it's going to be better coming from a third party where you can ask questions, not from your spouse or not from your spouse's attorney or your spouse's expert, and definitely not from your accountant. I think that that's sometimes where we will go and be like, hey, accountant, you've been working with us for a long time. What's the value of this? Or how do we split these things up? And that's usually a misaligned connection as well. So, divorce is the twilight zone. And it's a whole different universe. And so you have to have people that understand valuation in the context of divorce, because our valuation rules don't exist in the twilight zone. We have to incorporate the divorce rules for each state, and it gets a little bit more complicated. But I think that in essence, working with one valuator, and I tell people, what if that valuator comes back and says a number that you don't like, or it just doesn't make sense and you never felt comfortable? At all times, can you go hire a second person? And you can always get a second opinion. But why start out with two opinions that you're just fighting about? Like, why not start with one? And especially if your spouse is willing to go down that path, start with one, get some of the information known, and then you can always choose to have somebody come in and review it. Like, I've done that before. If they already had a valuator and they're just like, I don't think that this person knows what they're doing, I would say, well, let them finish. Let's get whatever the product is, and then let's review it. It might only take me 3 to 5 hours or less to review something, and we don't have to do the work again. And, oh, well, he got it wrong, but he got it wrong by 200,000 or 20,000 or 5,000, like, let's see. And then I'm your sanity check to the other valuator. So there's a lot of ways. And I think it's about cutting costs. I don't think the only reason why you would pay for two valuations is to fight them. That's it. And you better be willing to take it to court.
And I think it's such a good point, though. But a lot of times people don't even know what to ask the valuator. And having somebody go through it, like, I don't do business valuation, but I will go through a valuation report and give the clients questions that they can ask the valuator, because they don't necessarily know, they don't necessarily understand the various approaches to valuation, and just feeling like you are empowered to be involved with that valuation process. It's not just, here, Melissa, can you take my business and value it? But let me understand the process, educate me on how you determine the value, so I can feel confident. I can trust that value, and I can move forward knowing that I understand that piece of it, right?
Absolutely. Well, and I think it's understanding what, like, my process is a little unique in most of our benefit or our value is in the discovery process. And so when we're working for both people, we are actively getting all of the financial documents that everybody can look at. There's very much transparency in the communication, and there's transparency in who can look at the documents. I even encourage, like, if you need somebody else to help you look at those documents, if you need somebody there to support you, that because they understand financials, it's having that guidance and capability. But what we do is we walk through the history and we walk through the assumptions. And it's a better situation with partners, but basically I'm going to over communicate what I see in the historical financials so that one spouse that's not in there understands what's really happening. And then I'm going to ask questions about the items that move the needle in the valuation, right? Not everything is important. There's probably 5 to 10 things that are hyper important. And if those are there, nothing else matters, right? And so it's really trying to get everybody on the same page before I allow them to see the impact on the valuation. And so if we all agree to this, if we all agree to the ingredients we're going to use to make this cake, then we've agreed if it's going to be chocolate or vanilla. We've agreed if it's going to be sugary or salty, right? We've agreed to some of these things. If you thought it was going to be chocolate and you thought it was going to be vanilla and we didn't talk about that, and I just pop out a number to you, you're going to be like, whoa, I thought we were eating chocolate cake and we're not. So it's really going back and saying, does everybody understand the history? Does everybody understand where we're going to be in the future? And you will have the business owner will try to make it doomsday, right? But I am there to prevent that. I am there to protect both of them from themselves, basically, right? I am there. And what I tell people is, if I tell you a value and you take the same financial data to somebody else and they come up with a drastically different value, that's my reputation, right? So I usually want anything that I produce to be able to be replicatable, but also to be able to be viewed by an experienced valuation person. And they would say, not that it's right or wrong, because nobody would ever say it's right or wrong, but they would say it's reasonable. I've made reasonable assumptions, and I get the parties buy-in. I get them to understand it before I show them the number. And then when the number is shown, it should almost be like, oh, okay, that's what the number is. There is no discussion of like, oh, well, you got this input wrong. No, that should have been already discussed, and we will belabor it. Like, for example, for the valuation of a law firm, okay, one of the biggest things is the accounts receivable. And sometimes that's never booked. And sometimes it's booked and it's never shut down, right? So you could have an accounts receivable that literally is like 10 years of their receivables, but they never wrote them down because it's just a calculation. It's just a cash, like they don't even care about it. So now you get divorced and you have this $12 million accounts receivable and you're like, oh my gosh. And they're like, no, that's our accounts receivable for the entire 12 years, right? So it's very much, and I think when people see numbers, they're like, oh, this number means I'm getting $6 million, right? So I'm really there to be like, no, that's not what that number means, and start to kind of not lower expectations, but align the expectations with reality. And if it doesn't make sense, then we ask more questions. If it doesn't make sense, we get more information. If we really have identified that that person is being untrustworthy or hiding things, then odds are they're going to exit that situation. Like they're going to want to get out of working with us when we identify that something like that has happened. When the books don't make sense, because we are looking for things that don't make sense. We do usually have people that are like, well, they could have been hiding money or they could have been spending it on somebody else. Like we do a short look at that. We're not hyper looking at that, but we're certainly addressing your concerns and maybe getting additional documentation like business bank account information and saying, hey, why don't you guys look through that and see, because you're going to recognize names and places more than I am. And if you have a question about it, let's have that question when we have our business valuation meetings. But I'm not going to go look for ways that somebody is doing things wrong, but I'll get the documents so that you and your team can look at that, if that makes sense.
It does. And I so appreciate how much education it sounds like you do with your clients, Melissa, because I know that all professionals do not do that level of education with their clients around the business valuation. So what should people be looking for when they are hiring an expert for their case?
Okay. Hiring an expert, you want somebody that can testify or that has testified in court and usually has a good track record. But what you're also hoping is that they have some sort of alternative dispute resolution options. And that could be mediation. That could be, arbitration is still an option, but typically not for divorce. But mediation or collaborative or, finding professionals that align with where you are in the process. So again, if you're at the beginning, usually that's when you hire a valuation person. We give you the number and then you go and you negotiate the rest of it. Some of the pieces that we also do, though, is that we then help them negotiate all of it, because a lot of that is then uncovering other issues in the other financial areas. And so, does the person have the capability to do both? Or are you looking at two different people, right? So I think identifying somebody who is very upfront with their capabilities and their experience is helpful. I don't know a lot of valuation people that like to work in divorce and like to work with both people, because it is very much a kind of communication, mediation, you're dealing with personalities. Sometimes the attorneys are not with me, a lot of times the attorneys are just like, here, you deal with the couple. And when you're done, send them back to us. So I would ask questions. I would have both of you could talk to the person. If you know that there's some sort of major financial issue, like an inheritance, like, he believes that he started this business with his own money before the marriage, and that's a significant issue. I think you need to ask the person, do they have the capabilities to deal with that issue? Again, people could not be truthful with you. I also would reach out to people who are active in social. And I know that seems crazy, but it takes a lot for us to put ourselves out there and to talk about very complex financial matters and to tell people how we're doing it. And so I think that somebody who is actively putting themselves out there is your first, and what is their personality? Because you might be dealing, like I deal with clients for a few months.
Right.
I bring in other professionals, so I think talking to them, and then everything is state specific. So from a financial perspective, we can work in most states, right? As long as we understand the nuances of the state. But if I had an Ohio case, I would maybe reach out to Leah and say, hey, Leah, like, what do you know about, is there any unique financial things going on? Or, do the courts look at look at assets in a certain way, right? For example, people like second divorces. I know it's hard, but like second marriage divorces or gray divorces, you may have an asset that was separate. You may have premarital agreements. You may have all of these things in. So having somebody have a depth of knowledge about more complex financial matters is going to be helpful, or resources to pull in other team members. But yeah, I think you have to vet them, and maybe most people won't give you a sample, but I think just understanding that they have some consistency. And for the most part, when people are not successful in this line of work, they stop doing it because it is very difficult. Now, if you start with mediation and you are like, well, we'll figure out if we pop out of it, and you hire somebody that doesn't go to trial. Like if I work with a couple, I will follow the valuation to trial. Now, what does that mean? It means that I don't care if you guys like it or don't like it. My role is for the court. I am to educate the court and to give everybody a basis to value this asset. And so I will follow it if one person is like, and that usually protects the outspouse or the non-business owner. They get the valuation, they get an expert that can take it to court, but I'm not there to fight it. I'm just there to support what I provided to the couple. And I think that's a little bit different.
It definitely is. There's no question about it, and super helpful for sure. And one of the other things that I like about the way you work with people, Melissa, is it's not just giving them a number, but you're really able to support them well beyond that number in helping them understand options for the business going forward. A lot of times when people are going into this, they don't even know what options exist, right? What are they going to do? They're either going to come up with the money or they're going to sell the business, or, but they don't know that there is a whole range of options. So I'm curious if you have some tips for our audience around negotiating the options when it comes to the business.
Well, for the business, you're going to have two issues. One is if the business is worth $2 million, it sits on your personal balance sheet. It sits on what you have, right? You have a business and it says 2 million, but one of it, and you have to split that, or one person keeps it. The issue typically is that business is also creating income. And in a lot of states, in a divorce, anything that happens after the date of divorce is you don't get, right? So that's future earnings, or that's future revenue, or there's future whatever. But the reality is part of what makes the business value is that future revenue. And so that's part of the valuation. But it's also like, well, we had all of our insurance through there. Well, we were using that to have other ways to expense, our cell phone and our office and things like that. So when you're coming in, and for the most part, a court is going to want one of you to keep that business or not. And that usually then creates something that has cash flow going forward, that one person that can continue to have the cash flow, and one person just gets what they get and there's nothing else. So that's the discrepancy that people are faced with of like, well, this doesn't seem fair. This doesn't seem reasonable. I don't like fair because I think it's the F word, because nobody really cares about fair. They care about reasonable. They care about, is this going to be something that you guys can continue with? In some cases, if a lot of the value is just in, people who are making it big as personalities, right? Part of the income that's coming off of their Instagram or YouTube or whatever is like, we don't know how long it'll last, right? So It's just kind of continuing for right now, and it could exponentially go higher or it could stop. In that kind of case, if you have two people that maybe contributed to that, even if the court is going to want to force one of you to keep it, there may be a way that you guys can agree to share that income for a certain time period. Maybe that means that one person still is the owner and one person is not the owner. Maybe that means that there's a buyout. And I say buyout loosely because that's not totally how it works. But maybe there is a property settlement and you receive some money. Maybe there's some, that's the way of maintenance or alimony, is to split that business and the income. And maybe, like we have some people who have done small business loans, SBA loans, as a family business. And those are 10-year loans. And we're in year 2. And they say, can you get my spouse off of there? No, I can't. And probably nobody can, right? So it's understanding that, like, okay, if that's the issue and I'm going to have to stay on this loan, should I still be benefiting from the income? Can I still be an employee? Is that really correct? Like, am I doing something? Is this accounting? Am I defrauding the government kind of situation? Is the IRS okay? So you're walking through like, well, maybe I could be an employee. Maybe then I could have health insurance. Maybe then I can have my cell phone. Maybe then, but can we work together, right? The court is always concerned that if you can't stay together as a couple, can you stay together as working? So sometimes it could be that you're going to be removed from it, but we're going to have ways that you share in that cash flow. And so I think it's kind of, the businesses usually do create these roadblocks that sometimes we cannot get over, and it forces us to have creative ideas. The court never has creative ideas. The court's creative idea is to sell it. And that is the most asinine idea when you have a small business that's literally funding the family. The concept of selling it is not going to be beneficial to anybody. So it's like they don't have a good solution in the court, but they also don't have any good options, right? And they'll do that for anything. Oh, you guys, like right now we have a case where both people want the house, and the judge says, fine, we'll sell it. We're like, no, that's not a good option, right? So you are in charge, and that's where I think, going about this in a very informed process is that if you guys work with somebody and you have a situation that just is not going to be fixed by the court, then you have to pop it out to professionals that can help you fix it. And you might have to find a divorce attorney that helps you, because you still have to go into the court typically and then tell them what you decided. And the court can say that that's unconscionable. The court could say, that's not fair or that's not reasonable. And so you're trying to show something that makes sense, but that is also not uniquely biased to one person.
Yeah, it's such an important point. And so often especially when it comes to this business valuation and the unknown of what could happen with the business, people aren't taking the time to fully understand what all of their options are. And that's really what intentional divorce is all about. It's about being informed, being educated, and being empowered to make those decisions in a way that you do get a reasonable solution that, like you said, Melissa, a lot of times selling it is just not a great option for anybody involved. And so coming up with something that is at least reasonable, that's going to work for everybody is so important for these family businesses. So you are such a great resource for people, Melissa. How can they find you?
Well, we have been building up kind of our online community with valuationmediation.com. And it's really a broader resource that, we have Leah as, a preferred professional as well. But it's really trying to pull together people that are all working in the same concept, that there's no right or wrong way to do this. But I will say more often than not, the value for a family business is lower than everybody believes it is. And that is the difficult part, is that we are trying to figure out how to make this work. The cash flow usually always works for the family, but then splitting it or doing other things is where it gets complicated. But reach out. A lot of times we offer, not a lot of times, we offer, a free consultation basically to talk about your situation. Because we do so much in litigation, mediation, and other realms, it's really making sure that we're a good fit for you. And I think at any point, if you could I usually encourage the business owner or the spouse to get the business owner to call me. Because I talk the talk. And if they understand that I'm really there to protect everybody in that, and that making it an educated decision, right? Then I think everybody feels more comfortable, because the most part, they just want to know that number, and they want to know that it's fair for everyone. Because even if they don't get along totally, they don't necessarily want to screw the other person over. They're trying to figure out how to co-parent. They're aware that most of the income is coming from here. How do we split it? How do we make both of us safe and secure going forward? So that kind of conversation happens. And it's really, I also encourage people that a lot of financial professionals work online, so if you find right people, if Leah's the right person, work with Leah. She'll tell you whether she knows that state's rules, but a lot of financial things don't, business valuations kind of span all states, right? We're really looking at it from a financial concept. But they can reach out to me on Valuation Mediation, sign up for an appointment, and then we'll talk through and we'll say, what does it look like? A lot of what I'm doing is trying to do things cheaper and more efficient, which means reviewing it online, which means doing we call it a reality check. Like, do you want to do a whole big valuation for like 10, 15 grand? No. Do you want to pay a couple grand to get a reality check? Yeah, maybe. And then if you need something more to produce to the court, right? Because you both have agreed, right? Then let's produce something that enunciates the decision, as opposed to just producing these drafts that can be used against you. So I don't allow you to use me against each other. And I think that you have to have ways to protect yourself in that space, but definitely, and start to educate yourself, right? Start to educate yourself on some of these business valuation concepts. Like, you don't want to be the least experienced in the room, but also you'll never know enough, So getting the right professional that is basically telling you, if I see something, I'm going to tell everybody I saw it. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to ask questions about why it's in there. And then we're going to figure out how to deal with it. But we're not just going to ignore it, the elephant in the room. We're actually going to invite it to the table and sit down and have a meal. So that is sometimes uncomfortable if we have been keeping things from each other in the past. So I bring everything to the light.
Yeah, such a good point. Melissa, thank you again for taking the time to share your wisdom with us today. It was such a pleasure talking with you, and hopefully we will talk again soon.
Yes, thank you so much, Leah.
Thank you for joining me on Intentional Divorce Insights. It's a privilege to share this time with you. I hope each episode offers valuable guidance to navigate your journey. If you find our content helpful, please leave a review to help others discover the benefits of intentional decision-making in divorce. Until next time, take care and continue to embrace your path with intention.